She worked 16 hours, smiled through exhaustion, and went home with a paper bag of leftovers, not for herself, but for her family. What her CEO discovered next shattered him. Danielle Brooks wasn't just hungry. She was the backbone of a broken system millions still live in today. In a country where over 17 million households face food insecurity, one woman's quiet request exposed everything. And when Jordan Whitman finally saw the truth, he made a choice that changed lives. It started with a single line on a standard company form. Quiet, almost hesitant. Would it be okay to take home any leftover food after my shift? Most requests that reached the executive office were about vacation days or scheduling conflicts. But this one landed differently on Jordan Whitman's desk. A handwritten message from a young kitchen worker named Danielle Brooks, 27 years old, full-time, always on time, always the last to clock out. No formal complaints, no disciplinary records, just a quiet, invisible fixture in a loud, fast-moving operation. The question itself wasn't extraordinary. What haunted Jordan was why it had to be asked in writing. Why someone who had earned her place still felt she had to ask permission to eat what others discarded. That was the first signal something was broken. Danielle's note wasn't about food. It was about navigating a workplace and a world where asking for help comes wrapped in shame. She had likely spent days debating whether to write that line, knowing that one poorly perceived request could brand her needy or difficult. The pressure to be invisible while overperforming is a weight too many workers carry, especially those who've been conditioned to believe they can't afford to draw attention to their needs. People like Danielle aren't lazy. They're often working twice as hard to be seen as half as capable. Their reward? A mattress on the floor, a skipped meal. A quiet lie to their younger siblings about having eaten earlier, just to keep them from worrying. The numbers behind her reality are staggering. More than 17 million U.S. households struggled to put food on the table last year. Rent has outpaced wage growth in almost every major city. Full-time employees, especially in service industries, are routinely forced to choose between housing, medication, or meals. And the safety nets meant to help? Often tangled in red tape, underfunded, or stained by stigma. Danielle's quiet request shattered the illusion that everything was fine, not just for her but for Jordan. He had built a business based on quality and service. Yet the people delivering it were being quietly broken by the system around them. And once you see that, truly see it, you don't get to unsee it. By the time Jordan Whitman reached the rear stairwell of the corporate office, the building was dead silent. Boardrooms locked, elevators dark. Even the security monitors showed nothing but static-backed stillness. Yet outside, under the dull orange wash of a parking lot floodlight, something moved. Through the kitchen's back exit, Danielle Brooks emerged. Her hair was pulled up in a loose knot, streaks of sweat and steam clinging to her skin from the long hours over burners. She cradled a brown paper bag with both arms, not the kind used to pack a lunch, but the kind you carry like it matters. Like it means the difference between someone going to bed, fed, or empty. She didn't know Jordan was watching from the second-floor window. Not yet. He followed quietly, taking the long route to the garage so he wouldn't be seen. A few minutes later, his black SUV rolled onto the street, headlights dimmed, trailing at a cautious distance behind the city bus Danielle had just boarded. It wasn't just curiosity that kept him going. It was something harder to name, a kind of guilt that hadn't found its shape yet. Not until later. The ride was longer than expected. At first, the route wound through familiar parts of the city. Coffee shops still aglow with closing baristas, couples walking dogs, electric scooters abandoned on sidewalks. But soon, all of that faded. The sidewalks cracked. Storefronts gave way to chain-link fences and boarded windows. The lights dimmed, then disappeared altogether in patches. The street lamps, when they worked, flickered like dying fireflies. Jordan had lived in this city for 20 years and never once taken that route. At 12:43 a.m., Danielle pulled the signal cord and stepped off. Jordan parked half a block away and watched as she walked briskly, no hesitation, no glancing behind, just steady steps down an uneven sidewalk. She turned a corner and disappeared behind a row of weather-beaten trucks. He pulled forward slowly. Then he saw it. A trailer, not one of the newer prefab homes. This one had rusted seams, patched-over windows, and a sagging porch. A single porch light buzzed to life as Danielle approached, her key already in hand. The paper bag was still tucked against her chest. She moved quietly, like someone who'd learned not to wake others. Jordan's hands gripped the wheel tightly. His heartbeat stayed calm, but something in his chest tightened. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe a modest apartment, maybe shared housing. But this? He couldn't look away. Inside, the flicker of a weak ceiling light cast shadows through thin curtains. Danielle stepped in and was immediately greeted by 3 children, no older than 12. 1 boy, 2 girls. They rushed toward her with unguarded joy, wrapping around her waist like vines. She laughed softly, then crouched to their level and spoke with a tenderness that didn't match the fatigue in her eyes. Behind them, an older woman appeared, maybe 70, thin-framed and slow-moving. Her posture was bent, her steps cautious. Danielle helped her into a chair before making her way to the counter and opening the paper bag. Jordan leaned forward slightly. The light inside was dim, but clear enough to see what happened next. Danielle unpacked the food and divided it between 4 paper plates, not 5. She handed the meals out first to the kids, then to the older woman. She smiled, nodded, listened as they talked. But she never touched her own plate. She cut the food into smaller bites, moved them around with her fork, laughed on cue, but she wasn't eating. Jordan's stomach turned. Not because of the food, because of what it meant. Danielle hadn't brought food home for herself. She had brought it for them, her family. And the idea of eating while they went without, that was never even on the table. The scene was intimate and painful. Not because Danielle looked broken, but because she looked whole and still had nothing. She had built this routine care for the kids, serve the elder, survive the night into something seamless. And no one at the office had noticed. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern, one that had likely gone on for months, maybe longer. When one of the kids asked her, "Did you eat at work today?" Jordan caught the hesitation in her face, just a blink, a pause, before she smiled and said, "Yeah, I grabbed something earlier." The child nodded. But Jordan saw the doubt in his eyes. That lie wasn't deception. It was protection. She was giving them peace in place of food. Outside, Jordan shifted uncomfortably in the driver's seat. His legs were cramped, his jaw tight, but he kept watching. The trailer's layout offered no privacy, no real rooms, just sections. The kids' bedding was stacked in one corner, folded blankets and thin pillows. The older woman's recliner doubled as a bed. And Danielle? She laid out a foam mat on the kitchen floor. No door, no cushion, no dignity. This was the cost of her silence, the price of pride. She had made herself invisible so they wouldn't feel ashamed. That, her version of strength. Across the country, more and more workers like Danielle are doing exactly this. According to federal data, nearly 60% of Americans living in poverty are working, many of them full-time. But wages haven't kept up with inflation, and housing costs have exploded. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition reports that there is no U.S. state where a full-time minimum wage worker can afford a one-bedroom rental without spending over 30% of their income. In cities like Los Angeles or Miami, even workers earning $20 an hour are being priced out of housing. Danielle's trailer isn't unusual. It's part of a larger pattern of modern-day working poverty, what policy experts now call precarious survival. Food insecurity, too, has rebounded to pandemic levels. The USDA estimates 17 million households faced food insecurity last year. Feeding America reports record numbers at food banks, many of them serving people with jobs. This isn't just about economics. It's about policy failure. A minimum wage still set at $7.25. Rent control rolled back. Social programs chronically underfunded. And in the workplace? The gap between perception and reality is vast. Jordan sat in a building with floor-to-ceiling glass and climate-controlled elevators, approving wage structures that looked generous on spreadsheets. But those numbers didn't show the mattress on the kitchen floor. They didn't show the unpaid mental toll, the skipped meals, the lie, told with a smile. What he saw that night, the intimacy of Danielle's exhaustion, the practiced silence of her sacrifice, pulled him out of numbers and into truth. And that truth burned. He stayed long after the lights inside the trailer went dark. Hours passed, but Jordan didn't leave. He thought about the language used in corporate reports. Employee satisfaction, competitive wages, family-oriented culture. But where was the family in a place that let someone like Danielle go unnoticed? What haunted him most wasn't just Danielle's situation, it was how normal it had become. He wondered how many other names he'd seen on timesheets, never knowing their stories. How many other handwritten requests were sitting in drawers, ignored. His car idled in the silence. He stared through the windshield like a man seeing through a fog that had always been there, but only now began to clear. Jordan Whitman didn't sleep that night. He didn't even try. After the trailer light flicked off and the last signs of movement disappeared, he sat motionless in his car for over an hour. No music, no podcasts. Just the low hum of his engine and the sound of his own breath. The windshield fogged with condensation as the city exhaled its last sighs of night. But Jordan couldn't look away from what he'd just seen. Inside that rusted trailer, his entire belief system had been cracked wide open. Danielle Brooks had done everything right. She showed up. She worked hard. She stayed late. She took care of her family. And yet she was sleeping on a foam mat near a stove, skipping meals to keep her siblings and grandmother alive. She didn't just need help. She needed a system that didn't fail her. Jordan had spent years believing that good intentions and decent wages were enough. But the image of Danielle's tired smile, pretending to have eaten, haunted him in a way that spreadsheets never could. This wasn't charity work. This wasn't about feeling good or writing a check. This was about responsibility and repair. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contact list, stopping on one name, Brenda Alvarez, his head of operations. She was sharp, methodical, and didn't tolerate nonsense, exactly what he needed right now. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "It's past midnight," she said, her voice groggy but alert. "Everything okay?" Jordan looked back at the trailer one last time, his jaw clenched. "No," he said flatly. "Everything's not okay." There was silence on the other end. "We've got a problem," he continued, "and we're fixing it first thing in the morning." He didn't wait for questions. He didn't need permission. He ended the call. Because this wasn't a suggestion. This was a turning point. By 7 a.m., Jordan was back in the office. Not in a suit, not with a coffee in hand, just a plain gray sweater and a notepad full of ideas that had kept him up all night. At 8:15 sharp, the operations team assembled. Brenda, the legal advisor, 2 senior VPs, and the head of HR. They expected a policy briefing. Instead, they got a reckoning. Jordan stood at the head of the table, eyes sharper than usual. The team shifted in their seats, sensing the difference in the air. "Let's stop pretending we're doing enough," he began. He walked them through Danielle's story, no names, no identifying details, but every moment burned with precision. A woman working 16-hour shifts, feeding others before herself. A trailer with no rooms. A floor for a bed. A fake smile to protect her family from the truth. "I saw it with my own eyes," he said quietly. "And I can't unsee it." The room fell still. No one reached for coffee. No one checked their phones. Jordan continued. "Starting today, leftover food will no longer be thrown out. It will be pre-packaged and distributed at the end of every shift. No formal request. No stigma. Just take what you need." He turned to Brenda. "We'll need logistics, coolers, packaging, training. I want this in place by next week." She nodded slowly, taking notes. Jordan didn't stop. "Second, wages. I want a full audit. I don't care if we've been told they're competitive. If anyone working full-time can't afford rent, we're paying too little." He pointed to the finance lead. "Pull national data. Compare us to actual living wage estimates by region, not averages. Living wage. I want adjustments proposed by the end of the month." The HR director raised a hand. "Sir, quick raises or targeted benefits could create pushback from staff who don't get them." Jordan didn't blink. "Then we explain. We talk to people. We communicate the truth that some of our own are barely surviving. That we're fixing it. Not because it's popular, because it's right." He turned back to the group. "Third, we're launching an emergency assistance program. Discreet, fast access, no red tape. If someone can't afford food, rent, or meds, they don't need a lecture. They need help. Silence. Then slowly, a few nods. It wasn't the kind of meeting that ends in applause. It was the kind that ends with responsibility hanging heavy in the air. Behind the numbers Jordan cited was a growing crisis. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, real wage growth had barely kept pace with inflation. A modest raise meant nothing when grocery prices rose 19% over 2 years. Food insecurity had spiked again after pandemic-era relief expired. And despite working full-time, millions of Americans were still living on the edge. In Jordan's own company, the annual budget included thousands for marketing retreats and catered board meetings, while team members like Danielle were sharing one meal across 4 plates. The math wasn't the problem. The priorities were. After the meeting, Jordan didn't return to his corner office. He walked the floors. Not in a performative way, no cameras, no social posts, just conversations. He stopped by prep kitchens, storage rooms, employee lockers. He asked about the shifts, the schedules, the people. He listened. And for the first time, he heard things he'd never been told. A dishwasher who skipped his lunch to send money home. A single mom who left early 3 times a week, not to slack off, but to avoid being fined for late daycare pickup. An older janitor sleeping in his car between double shifts because rent hikes had forced him out of his apartment. None of them had ever complained. They just kept showing up. And now, so would Jordan. That afternoon, Danielle showed up for work like she always did early. Quiet, focused. She wasn't expecting anything. She didn't know she had changed the course of the company with a single, cautious request. Her manager pulled her aside and handed her an envelope. Inside, a raise. Not a token increase. A meaningful one. Enough to cover rent for an apartment. Enough to replace her with a real bed. Enough to let her eat without guilt. She didn't cry. She just stood there, holding the paper like it might disappear. For once, she didn't have to lie to her family that night. Jordan sat quietly at his desk when the email alert popped up. Policy updates approved. But this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The beginning of a culture shift from reaction to reflection, from checking boxes to checking hearts. And the question that kept ringing in his head wasn't, how did we miss this? It was, how many others are we still missing? The next morning didn't feel like any other workday. There were no press releases, no internal emails hinting at change. But behind the scenes, a quiet storm had begun to move through every department. Jordan Whitman arrived early, just as the cleaning staff was finishing up. No coffee in hand, no assistant trailing behind. Just the CEO with rolled-up sleeves and a mission. By 10 a.m., the first initiative had already gone live. Leftover meals once casually discarded or composted were now being sorted, sealed, and distributed at the end of every shift. Every station was trained. Each employee knew, take what you need. No questions, no labels, no shame. Food insecurity was no longer invisible in that building. It was acknowledged, named, and addressed, not as charity, but as basic decency. Across the country, nearly 1 in 8 American households faces food insecurity, a figure that spikes in single-parent families and households of color. For employees like Danielle Brooks, that one shift in policy meant fewer skipped meals, fewer lies to her siblings about eating earlier, and the beginnings of trust in a workplace that had, until now, never truly seen her. Jordan didn't stop there. The wage audit was next. He assigned a task force to benchmark every hourly and salaried position against living wage standards, not just industry averages. Using tools like the MIT Living Wage Calculator, they evaluated pay not as a cost center, but as a survival metric. In Danielle's city, the living wage for a household with 2 children was over $24 an hour. Danielle had been making less than 2/3 of that. By noon, adjustments were being drawn up. The mandate was simple. No full-time employee should ever again have to sleep on a kitchen floor while working 40-plus hours a week. But the change didn't stop with dollars. The new Employee Assistance Fund launched quietly that afternoon. It was built for speed and privacy. An online form, no supervisor approval needed. If an employee was facing eviction, couldn't afford medication, or was behind on utilities, help was now just a few clicks away. The form asked no invasive questions, just need, urgency, and preferred contact method. Human resource staff were trained to process requests within 48 hours. No one would be made to beg. Too many working-class Americans face these quiet emergencies, yet fear of being labeled unstable keeps them silent. Especially among racial minorities, there's often a deep cultural reluctance to ask for help shaped by a history of being denied, dismissed, or judged. Jordan knew that if the system didn't offer dignity, no one would use it. So he built that dignity into every detail. Meanwhile, Danielle returned to work the same way she always had, early, focused, unnoticed. But this time, things were different. Her shift manager pulled her aside and handed her a plain envelope. Inside was a raise, a real one, enough to get her and her family out of the trailer park by the end of the month, enough to eat without guilt, enough to breathe. She stared at the number for a full 30 seconds before she spoke. "Thank you," she said softly. Then she returned to the grill like nothing had happened. But everything had. That day, the kitchen ran a little differently. Co-workers whispered about the new food pickup line. Prep staff double-checked their pay stubs. A few veterans side-eyed the assistance flyers pinned near the break room. Change is never immediate, but seeds had been planted. And the moment Danielle picked up her bag at the end of her shift, she noticed something. A younger colleague, someone new, slipped a meal container into her own backpack. No hesitation, no shame. Danielle smiled, nodded once, and walked out the door. Back in his office, Jordan stared at the city skyline, hands still in his pockets. The day hadn't fixed everything, but it had started something real. He thought about the companies still tossing meals into dumpsters while their employees went home hungry. The boardrooms talking about employee wellness while ignoring rent data. The way his own company had claimed to be family-oriented without once asking if their people could afford to take care of their own families. That was over now, because it had to be. Because someone wrote a note. And this time, someone read it. Change didn't come because of a headline. It didn't come from a lawsuit or a viral campaign. It came from a handwritten note that most executives wouldn't have read. It came from one woman asking for leftovers not out of entitlement, but necessity. Danielle Brooks didn't intend to spark a movement. She wasn't looking for recognition. She just wanted to bring food home, to make sure her family ate, to get through one more night without having to lie. But when Jordan Whitman saw what her life really looked like, not the performance, not the paperwork, but the truth, he couldn't look away. And that's the difference. Most of us see suffering and keep walking. We explain it away. We say it's not our business or not our fault. But seeing without action isn't awareness. It's complicity. Jordan changed that. He didn't fix everything. No one person can. But he started. He listened. He restructured. He made care part of company policy, not as a favor, but as a responsibility. In the months that followed, food pickup stations became standard. Pay scales were adjusted across departments. Emergency grants helped more than 40 employees avoid eviction, afford medication, or cover family emergencies. The ripple effects were real and measurable. And yet, the story isn't finished. Because Danielle's situation isn't unique. More than 44% of U.S. workers earn low wages, many of them in roles deemed essential. Housing costs continue to climb. Healthcare remains out of reach for too many. Millions live paycheck to paycheck while working 40 or more hours a week. The problem isn't laziness. It's structural neglect, and it can't be fixed by empathy alone. But empathy is where it begins. So the next time you hear a story like Danielle's, don't dismiss it. Don't wait for someone else to care. If you manage people, look closer. If you're in a position of power, start asking better questions. Because there are more Danielles out there, quietly surviving, working harder than anyone realizes, hoping someone finally notices. The real test isn't whether you see them. It's what you do once you do.